Well, thank you all for coming today. Thanks for coming out on a little bit of a weather day and with free comics that you're giving up. I appreciate it. So I started doing this when I was a freshman in high school. My dad was a photographer in World War II. My wife's telling me to speak up. He was a photographer for the Army Air Corps. Among other things, he photographed the launch of D-Day. He spent time in France, Italy, Africa. He photographed Eisenhower a couple of times. After the war, he went into the photo engraving business. That's how you make printing plates. He had an old camera in the closet, and I picked it up. He didn't do much photography, but I got fascinated by this camera, and I got fascinated by developing film. So he taught me all the basics, told me how to develop film, taught me how to print, and helped me set up a darkroom in the closet of our garage, which was really hot during the summer. Unfortunately, I didn't grow up in Fort Worth. I like to tell people that I got here as soon as I could. I gave up my Dallas passport, and I sought political asylum, which is all true, but the reason I came here at all is because of the Dallas Times-Herald. See, the Dallas Times-Herald was the paper I grew up with. They had great photographers like Skeeter Hagler, Jay Dickman. They both won Pulitzer Prizes. They had John Mazziota. I went to school with his kids. He was the old guy who knew everything, could do everything, and I wanted to walk in their footsteps. Thank you. So I applied for the photo internship at the Herald. My best friend Steve Euchert had already secured the internship at the Dallas Morning News. He retired from the Houston Chronicle about 10 years ago. So I put on my best suit. It was my only suit. I showed my photos to Jerry McNeil. He was the photo editor for the Dallas Times-Herald, and he didn't like my work that much. But he did me a big favor. He gave me some good advice. He told me some things I could work on, so I went off for a year and I worked on those things. I came back the next summer. And Jerry said, I want to hire you, but we've promised our internship away to somebody else. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get you an interview with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. So I was sitting there and he called up Joe McCauley, the chief photographer at the Star-Telegram. He said, Joe, I've got this kid I want you to look at. I'm going to send him over tomorrow for an interview. So I came over to Fort Worth. I had an interview. It was a good interview. And a few weeks later, Joe called me up and said, I have an internship. $100 a week plus $1 a day for night differential because meals are a little more expensive at night. So I started. I knew absolutely nothing about the Star-Telegram. Literally, the only thing I knew was that they had color comics on Sunday. And the only reason I knew that is because Johnny Hay read them between episodes of Davy and Goliath and Clutch Cargo on the Children's Hour on Channel 5. So I started work at the beginning of the summer of 1975 and soon realized that this is really hard. It's like drinking out of a fire hose. And you might ask, what's so hard about it? You stand there and you make photos. And yeah, that's true in a way. The act of making a photo is not difficult at all. But there's a huge difference between making a good photo because you want to and because you're inspired to do it, and making a good photo under extreme pressure because you have to do it. Let me paint an illustration that's a little bit ridiculous, but I think it gets the point across. Let's say that there is a newsworthy rose to be photographed. Now, an amateur who wanted to photograph a rose would find a rose in a garden, maybe take it to a studio, find the right light, set it up the right way, the right lens, be very careful, and make a stunning photo of a rose. A news photographer will get the assignment late in the day after the news budget meeting. The rose will be somewhere in the Fort Worth Convention Center under a mix of fluorescent, mercury vapor, and incandescent light that renders no color the way it actually looks in real life. There's a crowd around the rose and they don't want to move. Someone will actually be opposed to you shooting the rose because the bromeliads haven't been in the paper in an awful long time. The editor texts and says the deadline's moved up because bad weather is moving in. You do the math and you should have left 5 minutes ago. You still need a picture of the rose. You need a picture of the rose and you need these 4 people and you have to get their names and titles correct left to right. They rearrange themselves a couple of times during the shoot. And now that we're in this part of the 21st century, you need to produce a video and do social media posts. So time pressure, technical problems, obstacles, the speed at which you need to work are nearly a constant. And you need to capture the decisive moment and do it better than the person next to you who is your competition. You may have heard the name Bob Jackson. Have you? Is anybody? You know his photo. I know you do. It's the Pulitzer Prize winning photo of Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald, and Oswald is reacting. Do you know the name Jack Beers? Jack was a great photographer with the Dallas Morning News. He was standing next to Bob and shot nearly the same photo. It was a great photo. It's just, it's almost perfect, except Jack shot 0.6 of a second before Bob. In that 0.6 of a second, the bullet hit Lee Harvey Oswald and he reacted. 0.6 of a second. I'll show you later, the 0.6 of a second is actually an eternity, but then that's all that separated those photos. Now, was it luck? Was it skill? Was it nerves on the case of Jack? Nobody knows. I don't think they would know. It just happened too fast. So all that's your chronic condition, and it doesn't go away. But it's like any other profession, doctor, lawyer, cop, teacher, plumber. You know, your plumber often has a lot of things to deal with before they can grab a wrench and fix your pipe. So learning how to solve problems under pressure when conditions are bad, everything's going wrong, is the superpower you aspire to. And when it works, it really works. When you've navigated some chaotic scene and moments of clarity begin to come together and you move all the puzzle pieces into place, and when your photographs begin to clearly tell some story, and it doesn't matter what story it is, just when they tell the story, it's really more fun than humans ought to be allowed to have. So with that, let's look at some photos. First, a word from our sponsor, the Fort Worth Press. Fort Worth Press, one of my first assignments when I came to the Star-Telegram was to cover the death of the Fort Worth Press. I knew even less about the press than I knew about the Star-Telegram. I didn't know whether they had color comics on Sunday, and I couldn't tell you to this day. But you never know when a day is going to be providential in your life, and that day was. Because when I was walking out of the Star-Telegram to cover the death of the press, a man named Gene Gordon was walking into the Star-Telegram. He was the press chief photographer. He was so good at coming back with great photos from any assignment, and I do mean any assignment, no matter how bad, that he had a standing offer to work at the Star-Telegram. Gene figured that was a really good day to exercise that option. A few months after I returned to the Star-Telegram, after graduating from A&M, Gene became our chief photographer and my chief mentor, and chief mentor to a whole group of young photographers, actually a couple of generations, who made the Star-Telegram an even better newspaper than the Dallas Times-Herald. Notice the poster for the great blues musician Robert Ely that the reporter at the press is packing away. In the continuing circle of life, a quarter century later, I covered Robert Ely's funeral as he was buried at DFW National Cemetery for his service in the Army in World War II. Now, newspaper photos fall into three broad categories. There's news for things that are timely. There's features for things that are interesting but not necessarily timely. And there's sports, which is sports. We have a lot of tornadoes in Texas, you may have noticed. They're hugely destructive. They're sometimes very odd. Occasionally there are moments of relief and even defiance. We have some floods too. Some of them you know are coming. The river's rising. honey, grab the deer head. And some overtake victims in seconds. 10 young Balch Springs church members died trying to wade out of their bus trapped in rapidly rising waters of the Guadalupe River near Comfort, Texas. And there are fires. Some are a nuisance, like this grass fire at the abandoned Great Southwest Airport. Some are more concerning, like this fire at a trailer storage facility in East Fort Worth. And some are deadly, like this one in Sansom Park. There was a toddler that was killed in this fire. The fire chief had 2 kids about that age. He needed a minute. And then there are murders. The worst, the Wedgwood Baptist Church shooting, upended hundreds of lives. This man was suspected of killing his housemate. That was just a blip in the news. It was never mentioned after Iran, but it's no less tragic. And then there's the bizarre. Shantae Mallard. She's testifying here during the penalty phase of her trial for murdering a pedestrian, a homeless man named Gregory Glenn Biggs. She was convicted of hitting him with her car. He became lodged in the windshield. She drove home, and he died in her garage. She refused to get him help. She was sentenced to 50 years in 2003 and will be eligible for parole in about 3 more years. After the verdict, I knew that the prosecutors, Christy Jack, Richard Alpert, and Miles Brissett, would rush downstairs to talk to the press. And I tried to be a little faster to get down there to catch them coming out the door. This is one of the rare instances where it works out better than I actually had in mind. And I love the photo. Now this is a crime that split, In June of 1998, a group of white supremacists dragged James Byrd Jr., I'm sure you remember, a black man, behind a pickup truck and killed him in Jasper, Texas. I covered the sentencing of one of the trials. This was a crime that really could have split this East Texas community, but from what I could see, it didn't. This is Sheriff's Deputy Curtis Frame. He's putting his arm around Everett Alfred, Director of Criminal Justice for the Deep East Texas Council of Governments. They were waiting for the jury decision. Here is Deputy Frame hugging his Sergeant James Carter after hearing that John William King was sentenced to die by lethal injection, and that sentence was carried out in 2019. The Sunspot news is actually good news, maybe even humorous, like game wardens capturing an alligator in the Trinity River just east of downtown.
Where were you?
I was across the river, yeah. It was a good place to be. Some news is very bittersweet, like this early morning arrival in 2010 of Army Specialist Lawrence Aldrich. He finally returned home from Vietnam. President Clinton visited in 1996. I was assigned to photograph his arrival at Meacham Airport and try to talk my way into a seat in the motorcade. I didn't know if that would work, but I started working on the advance people as soon as I got there and photographed the president checking his notes before he got in the limousine. And sure enough, I got a ride in the motorcade, which, was the thrill of a lifetime to be driving through downtown with all these crowds and, right into the event, no problems, no security, nothing. There's no way that should have happened. Now, this is protest in Dallas after the borders were closed to asylum seekers and refugees. Now, we have a lot of weather in Texas, and under the right circumstances, some of it can be downright beautiful. This is the landmark tower, once known as the Continental National Bank. It was imploded early on a Saturday morning in 2006. I had a couple of remote cameras set up and a couple of video cameras, but this was by far my favorite picture. I can't remember whether this was one that I was controlling or whether I was using a remote. You can put a remote on your camera and have it trigger other cameras. Now, PR events are a staple of newspaper work, and they rarely turn good, but this one did, when Governor Rick Perry went a little rogue and fired that gun up in the air with blanks. My buddy Tom Pennington with Getty Images and I were expecting a normal, boring photo from a normal, boring PR event for the NASCAR Motor Speedway. And we looked at each other in disbelief when he did this because we knew the pictures were going to go viral. And we were right. Every time Perry popped up in the news for years, this photo would come out. Bud Kennedy really looked at that photo and he decided that Perry was packing his own heat that day, which he was known to do. He was known to carry a gun. Now, features are anything interesting but not necessarily timely or even important. You can't see the very top of that photo, but it says Happy Station. It's just kids enjoying at a happy station on a summer day. Lovers in the back of a Pontiac convertible at the Brazos Drive-In watching Top Gun, or not. A cowboy at a church social. A girl getting her lamb ready for the stock show, however reluctantly. Maybe an Army skydiver practicing for the air show. I was strapped in, by the way.
Hey, Rodger.
Uh-huh.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When do you decide sort of a color photo versus like a black and white?
Some of these are from the era before color.
I didn't know if that was something.
Now, this is, I'm not doing this in chronological order. So we started doing color in the 80s or 90s. And so, and it was split even then for a while. Our publisher, Wes Turner, who was the best publisher I ever worked for, saw this Geico Gecko banner being towed around downtown and thought it might make a photo. And so I spent about an hour and a half getting in my car and driving to different places because every orbit was different. I was trying to get him peeking through the Bass Tower, and it finally worked. Wes was happy, I was happy. I found this chainsaw artist at the Canton First Monday Flea Market. I don't recall his name, but his son's name was Old Chainsaw. I kid you not. Now here's another PR event that turned good. Mesa Airlines was starting service to Canada out of Meacham Airport for some reason. And it didn't make much of a picture until these cowboys, including our own Steve Murren on the right, started comparing their boots with the Mountie. Now this is a view that will never be seen again. It was up on the north side, and now the horses are gone, and there's a building there, of course. Now in the early 80s, I photographed the West 7th Street Barber Shop. It was a Fort Worth institution, a classic old barber shop owned by Buddy Moore. And I used a classic old camera. It was a 1950s vintage press camera that took 4x5 sheet film, so individual sheets of film rather than rolls. It's best used on a tripod, And it makes beautiful pictures. It was a fun project. I bet most of you remember that. And then there was a tornado. And I came back to see Buddy Moore talking with his landlord about rebuilding. They did. They did come back. But they were moved by construction around the corner. I'm told that Buddy's son owns the shop now. Now, sports is all about anticipation, timing, and luck. This is an exercise that I tried to do every time I thought about it at a game, because this was really hard to get the ball in that position. You see how blurred the ball is? That's how far it moves in 1/1000th of a second. If you want to stop the action, you have to get more towards 1/8000th of a second. TCU basketball, a high school track meet. And Josh Hamilton making a play in the outfield. Sports Illustrated picked this picture up, and it ran 2 pages in their magazine. May they rest in peace. Some outfielders miss and tear the wall. The Rangers playing in the division playoffs and going to the World Series. I like how everybody raises their arms when they're happy and going to the World Series. Or even when they go 8 seconds on a Bronc named Done Busted. Serious question, how drunk do you have to be to think this is a good idea? Some sports require just a little bit of teamwork. Some require a lot of teamwork. And in some, the athlete is out there all on their own. I'm really glad he sliced it a little bit left that day, and doubly glad that he had the foresight to stick his arm in that gap in the trees. Now, this was the smartest man on the field that day. For years, this was my perch at the Texas Motor Speedway. No, there's no railing. Yes, you can walk right off. Oh. Yes. I had a rule that I would stand no closer than I am tall, plus a couple of inches. Eventually, they made us wear a harness and tie off, and I tied off to one of the big air conditioners that was up there. Now, one day, with about 20 laps left to go, I noticed that Tony Stewart and Jeff Gordon, the 14 and 24 car, and a bunch of other guys were really getting close, coming down the front stretch and going into turn 1. And I felt like they were going to have an accident, and I kind of hoped it would be right there. And sure enough, with 17 laps left to go, they did. They all got crossed up. And then Tony Stewart and Jeff Gordon walked off together. Tony trying to get his neck to go straight again. And I'm pretty sure he had a raging case of whiplash. In 2011, the Mavs won the NBA championship. Remember that? Well, the Mavs PR guy told one of our reporters that we could have a photographer up on the balcony. Frankly, I was skeptical. It seemed too good to be true. But I showed up at the door as directed, and sure enough, he opened it up, and I was the only one. He took me up there and opened the door to the balcony and said, "Have fun." That never happens. Anyway, when Dirk raised the trophy, I really had just about everything I needed. Remember the catch? Yes, I agree. The 49ers were behind in the 1981 NFC Championship game. It's 27-21 against the Cowboys with 58 seconds left to go. They were on the 6-yard line. Montana chased to the right, threw to Dwight Clark, who made a leaping catch in the end zone. The 49ers defeated the Cowboys 28-27. I anticipated the play differently, and I had too long of a lens on it. And that's the full frame. It was as tight as it could get. And Steve, it was also the days when we were shooting black and white in one camera and color in another camera, which is insane. But that's the way we had to do it.
You always see that on TV, that's an incredible shot.
Thank you. Thank you. I was happy to have it. And there's the catch, and there's the miss. This was some minor bowl game in Reno, Nevada with North Texas State University. It's the most miserable game I have ever been to. It was driving snow, freezing rain. My main lens froze up. It looked like my car after an ice storm. Anyway, the game went into overtime. I had to drive to the Reno newspaper to process my film and make photos. That's a courtesy that newspapers used to extend to each other. Now, you don't need to, you just go to Starbucks. I used to travel, if I didn't work at a newspaper, I used to travel with a ice chest full of darkroom equipment to set up photo labs in a hotel room. But anyway, after sending the photos, I had to catch a flight to Seattle to cover the Cowboys game the next day. It was far less than ideal. Oops. You go back. Okay. Well, missing a picture. Anyway. So to show you what can happen within a second, here's this picture of Dez catching a ball in the end zone, which was actually not ruled a touchdown. That's within that second. And then this sequence is all within 1 second. And that was the touchdown, I think. Sometimes the after the game is just as meaningful as the game. Tony Romo was laid up for several weeks after this. And sometimes it makes a better picture. Big brother kissing his little sister. Anticipation, timing, and luck apply to piano playing as well. Who knew? The Van Cliburn International Piano Competition comes to Fort Worth every 4 years. I covered it for the Star-Telegram a few times and took vacation and covered it for the Cliburn Foundation a few times as well. In the old days, we couldn't even physically be in the hall. We had to use remote cameras or shoot from projection booths or the alcove where the lights were hidden. Even then, even in the projection booth, we covered our cameras with huge leather padded, we called them blimps, that would muffle the sound of the camera. You know, the camera has a mirror that goes up and down and makes a lot of racket, and it disturbs the pianist. They worked. They covered most of the sound, but not all of it. The remotes, we would set up a box. This was set up in a box off the stage. You put the camera in it, you focus, you hope the piano player doesn't move the bench when they sit down. And then you also hope that your radios will trigger the remotes. This guy was known for this one maneuver to pluck a string in the piano. There was one piece of music that apparently called for that. Now the cameras are small, quiet, they're easy to hide. You can put them in the middle of the orchestra and nobody's any the wiser. My favorite pictures remain this one of Jan Jurček, German pianist who collapsed on the piano backstage. Russian pianist Valery Kuleshov, who played an encore. They used to play encores after the final performances. They stopped it when the second place medal winner played a very angry dirge. And they decided that it was too dangerous after that. Valery was second place, but he played a wonderful piece. And then this one of Van Cliburn talking with the finalists backstage. I loved it because Van was listening to them about their impressions of the music and what they thought about the pianos. And they were just talking shop, and Van was listening. Well, a great piano tip competition needs a great hall, and they built the bass hall. I had free run of the work site. I could go on site anytime I wanted and shoot any pictures I wanted to shoot and go anywhere. So I started on the project about the time the iron workers were doing their magic. Creating the skeleton of the hall. And then I photographed Marton Varro, the man who sculpted the Bass Hall Angels. He sculpted every inch of those angels himself. You will never see that picture again. Aside from the fact that there's a worker in there, they cut the holes for the trumpets, so that's the only picture I know of where the lips don't have a hole or a rod in them. Marton is the only actual Transylvanian that I know. I spent a lot of time with him up on the scaffold, which is about 60 feet high. There's the wonderful artistry of the Gentling brothers, Scott and Stewart, that graces the dome of the Bass Hall. And I got to hear Van play himself in his later years. If you don't know the story of Van Cliburn, I urge you to look it up. It's not too bold to say that he had a significant part in unthawing the Cold War between Russia and the United States, just through his artistry and his love and grace with the Russian people. Remember the tornado that hit downtown? Created the world's largest birdhouse, now called the Tower. I had free rein to document the reconstruction of the tower when they finally got the wherewithal to scrape it clean and redo it. Could go anywhere I wanted. The only requirements is that I had to take their safety course. I had to have a harness for doing this stuff. I wasn't actually hanging from the building. And I had to have a Nextel telephone. It was a construction thing then. I used the harness a lot, but I never used the telephone. That was the derrick as it was hanging out over Taylor Street. So they are high above Taylor Street right there. It's kind of interesting how they did this. You wonder how they got a tower crane on the top of a building. They took a small derrick up in the elevator and they used that. It was 8 feet long. They used that to lift a bigger derrick, and that lifted a bigger derrick, which lifted the tower crane. These guys are fearless. It's unbelievable. Now this took all the courage I had, and I actually asked my wife if she thought this was a good idea, to climb up into the tower crane. I think the building is 39 stories. The tower crane is 6 stories above that. There was a 15 to 20 mile an hour wind, and it had my full and undivided attention. He stays up there all day. I wish you could see the top of that. But anyway, I actually talked to this guy on another assignment later on. I did a story on iron workers. And I asked him, what do you think when you're out there over Taylor Street, you know, on this thing? And he said, I just think, step on the iron, baby. Just step on the iron. Now, for sheer horsepower, being on the deck of the USS Enterprise when it went out to sea was about as good as it gets. Military reporter Chris Vaughn and I boarded in Norfolk and were flown back to shore on a transport plane with a cat launch. So we were catapulted off the deck, which is more thrilling than Six Flags, I can assure you. The way they do it is they strap you in and they tighten it and tighten it and tighten it, and then they launch you off, and if you're not wet in 3 seconds, then you're flying. So we photographed them leaving their families, getting a last video, refueling their avgas at sea. It was a nuclear carrier, so they don't refuel the carrier. And then doing sea trials. Everybody has to get qualified to operate at sea. All the jobs have training that they have to do to make sure that everybody's ready to go on deployment. Now, a few days after we left the Enterprise, there was an accident with a plane like this and a big fire on the deck. And I had all the major news magazines calling me up because I had the last pictures of the Enterprise in action. So I got photos in several of the news magazines. This is a position that if you stand up, you could die when he takes off. Just like that guy is not standing up. Now in 2009, I had the privilege of photographing the inauguration of President Barack Obama. It was an exciting, crowded affair. And there was Bono singing at the Lincoln Memorial. Who doesn't like Bono? That was a thrill for me. Not so much for Sasha. She was pretty bored, much to the amusement of her father. I'll just say that the crowds were really big in 2009, and I'll leave it at that. My assignment was to work the crowd. I was working with McClatchy, and other people had the podium positions at the inauguration. And I photographed this woman who had waited all her life to have a president that looked like her. My sweetest memory, though, is to follow Opal Lee, our own Fort Worth's Opal Lee, around the Capitol. She wanted to see where she was going to sit. She had a pretty good seat at the inauguration. And she talked about buttonholing the president to talk him into making Juneteenth a national holiday. Well, it took her a while, but she did it. She got the Medal of Freedom yesterday. So let's talk about racism for a minute. I worked on a project with writer Tim Madigan and fellow photographer Jeff Washington to make photos related to the Jim Crow era in Fort Worth, people who have stories to tell about that time. Such as great baseball player Maury Wills. He broke Ty Cobb's stolen base record. He played for the Fort Worth Cats in minor league ball. And the legendary teacher Hazel Harvey Peace with her student Lieutenant General Titus Hall, Air Force retired. And then there was a story about a young family of the Reverend Lloyd Austin, who in 1956, he was a black preacher. He moved into the white part of Riverside neighborhood. The neighbors reacted angrily. They were threatening. There were a lot of very racist signs. At one point, Reverend Austin stuck a .22 rifle out the window and fired. He hit Larry Shoemaker's car. We got Reverend Austin and Larry Shoemaker together in 2002, and the two men awkwardly talked and made jokes. They reconciled, and they went on their ways. Now, in 1921, and by the way, Max Hill helped us to research this story, sitting right here. In 1921, a whites-only meatpacking union went on strike at the Swift plant up on the north side. African-American men were hired to break the strike. One of them was Fred Rouse. He was attacked, stabbed by white workers, white union members, and he fired a gun, striking two of them. They were brothers. He was beaten and hospitalized, but a mob dragged him from the hospital and lynched him at this corner. There was a famous tree there called the hanging tree. The city cut it down shortly thereafter in embarrassment. When I was there, the only thing growing there was this ivy on the street signs. The day after the photo ran, the city cut the ivy. Anyway, Fred Rouse had a one-year-old son when he was lynched. We didn't know that. Well, we knew about the son, but we didn't know of any direct descendants when we did the story. We photographed a nephew who had also worked at the Swiss plant and had stories to tell. But in 2020, TCU Magazine hired me to photograph Fred Rouse III because they had found him. It was easier. I don't know why we didn't find him, but it's easier to find people now. Fred Rouse III knew nothing about any of this. He had never heard of it until some person called him up during the NBA playoffs and said, "Fred, are you sitting down? I've got something to tell you." Anyway, he embraced the news in the history, and I had a great time photographing him at that site, and then where his grandfather was buried in an unmarked grave in Haltom City. In 2001, I got a chance to go to Bosnia for a few days with the Texas National Guard. They were the headquarters unit for the peacekeeping forces there, and it's the first time the National Guard had ever commanded regular Army troops and foreign troops. There were really precious few opportunities to show what that country was like We were mostly inside the base. But I got a few chances, and I learned how really insane civil wars are. This is the former Olympic Village, and the cemetery that was started after the war began goes up the side of a mountain. The sergeants kept stressing to us that mines had been strewn around like Easter eggs at a kid's hunt, and that if we were standing on soft ground, we were standing in the wrong place. The upside is that if you have a problem with mines, Bosnians have gotten very good at taking care of them. Now, one of the fun things about newspaper work is you get to photograph some famous people along the way, like Paul McCartney. Presidents 43 and 41. Dirk. King Richard Petty. Roger Daltrey. And the wonderful Tina Turner in her dressing room at the Tarrant County Convention Center. Joltin' Joe DiMaggio at an old-timers game. But as fun as that is, I can't really tell you that much about these people that you don't already know. I can tell you that Paul's alive, at least I think he is, from a half a football field away, and he moved pretty good for an old guy. If you think 43 is dim, you haven't watched him work a room. Tina Turner was sweet, she was gracious, and she put on an amazing show. I'm not sure Joe DiMaggio actually wanted to be there. I could be wrong. I can tell you more about people like Ed Knapp. Ed Knapp is a goat man, was called the goat man. He's a hermit who lived out on a hardscrabble piece of Loving County, the least populated county in Texas, with his goats. The directions to Ed's house were you go north from Pecos, you pass the road to Mentone, you take the third cattle guard on the right, you drive to the river, you get out and look for Ed. He didn't have a telephone. Sure enough, Ed was there. Out there with his goats. I'm not sure how, I don't remember how he made his money. I think he may have had a little royalty income or a pension. He lived very modestly. And our reporter, Tim Madigan, was told some years later that he died out there with his goats. I can tell you about Charlie Brooks. Charlie was the first person to be executed by lethal injection in 1981, I think. He had converted to Islam. He was calm, he was warm. He was very personable. His accomplice in the murder, they murdered a car salesman. He won an appeal and his death sentence was reduced to 40 years. I walked away with much more unease about the death penalty. Life is complicated, and when you think something is simple and you just need to meet the right person. Did you know that there was a Czech language newspaper in Texas? There was. It was called Nasenek. It was published in Granger. Its 104-year run ended not too long ago when Joe Vrabel here retired after moving to a nursing home or an assisted living. He ran the paper out of a storage closet in the assisted living center until he just couldn't do it anymore. I can show you J. Max Slaughter. He's an emergency room doctor, a former boy band member who heals kids with his music as well as his scalpel. And I can show you this guy with his buddy Jesus at the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe. I present to you the entire graduating class of Big Bend High School that year. And Deacon Juan Bautista going to a backcountry church in Honduras during a driving rain. Or this young man who's a Tzotzil Indian, or the Tzotzil tribe in Chiapas, Mexico. These are the Rainbow family gathering in East Texas, enjoying the air and the lake and the mud. I can show you Roughnecks in West Texas, cowboys at the Vernon Estate in Vernon, or at the Wagner Estate in Vernon, Texas, and a woman, a former barrel racer, struggling to keep her horse as she's been stricken with cerebral palsy. I've gone into open heart surgery. Got to tell you, the first open heart surgery I went into was a strange affair, and I didn't faint, I didn't throw up, but I noticed a pitcher of water sitting on the table there. I didn't think anything of it. It was a normal restaurant pitcher of water. And at one point in the surgery, the man's chest is open, and the surgeon takes the pitcher and he pours it into the guy's chest. And at that point, I nearly fainted. But he said that's the most efficient way to keep it cool. This is an eye exam in Mexico. A medical missionary flew down there to give free medical attention. This is an old West Texas farmer getting his ears cleaned out. We got a kid with his kid at the stock show. I'm not sure which is which. And a kid with his livelihood in Bosnia. And then there's kids, patriotic kids, raising their flag on the 4th of July. And a remarkable young woman named Chastity Young raising what she has to ask a question in class. Chastity was born without arms, and she was born essentially without legs. She has feet. I looked her up, and she's since become a motivational speaker and is a social media influencer. Then there's a day of prayer. This woman was praying fervently. Maybe she was praying for me. You never know when a day is going to be providential in your life. I had an assignment to photograph a Stearman biplane from another Stearman biplane. And it was a beautiful summer day, and I'm enjoying making the photos. And it's one of those days when it's warm, it's summer, and storms brew up. And we got back to Cleburne Airport, and there was a 30-knot crosswind. There are several good aerodynamic reasons why a Stearman biplane is not easy to handle in a crosswind. And we found that out. The guy I was with did 2 touch and goes trying to get it to land. And on the 3rd attempt, he lost control, and we ended up like this. I thanked God that I was live in the front seat of that plane, and I started smelling avgas. So I reached up and I put my cameras on the ground and I moved them out of the way, and I undid the strap and fell out of the plane and covered my own plane crash. This is my favorite sign in all the world. I know, it may not mean much to you. This was outside the Comanche Peak nuclear plant, and I'm sure it's about traffic safety. But the word photograph means to write with light. And as every photographer will tell you, the light is tricky. Those are my slides for today. I left about 20,000 out. Maybe you can have me back sometime. Thank you. If anybody has any questions.
You still have fun?
I do. Yes, I do. It is still fun to go on a story, any story, and be able to take things, the chaos. Every assignment is chaos when you get there. But to be able to take the chaos and make a coherent picture that tells the story is still fun. Yes, sir.
You know Steve Edmonds and
I do.
Gordon Trice.
I don't know Gordon, but I know Steve. Steve was a photographer at the Fort Worth Press. There were 3 photographers at the Fort Worth Press. Gene Gordon came to the Star-Telegram. Steve went to Six Flags. And then there was another photographer, and I've forgotten his name now, and he went to the Dallas Morning News.
We all grew up at Carter Riverside.
Oh, did you really? Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen Steve in quite a while. Yes, ma'am.
So I kept hearing you say that when you were on assignment and you're on assignment, were all the photos that we saw assignments, or did you go look for stories yourself and present them?
I initiated several of those. Some of them were assignments. They come in all sorts of ways. So Steve Kay was one of our assistant city editors, and they might come from a reporter. Steve might have thought of some. They may have come from a higher editor or the publisher or the photographer, see something that they want to do and just goes and does it. I wrote several stories for the Star-Telegram. We did a crime series, and I wrote a large part of that crime series. And now we do, videos and everything else. Hey, Max. Okay.
So when I look at the photos, I see what you give us is so much emotion when you capture these photos. Like, how do you push emotion out when you're trying to just capture the photo? How did you, like in some of the tragedies, still stay focused?
I think it's the same way that cops and emergency room workers and firemen do it. It's a job. It affects you. It does affect you. I probably should have gone to therapy a couple of times, but you do sort of put yourself at a distance. The one thing you can really comfort yourself with is that you're telling that person's story. So I'm relaying it to you. I'm helping that person out to tell you what I've been able to observe of their life. Max?
What kind of cameras do you use now?
I'm sorry. The question is, what kind of cameras do I use now? I use Canons. I have Fujis and Leicas. A friend came by the other day, or a couple of years ago now, I guess. Time travels really fast. And he had a basket case 8x10 Deerdorf camera. So I've restored that, and I'm making photos with that, and it shoots film that's 8x10 inches. So I use everything from a handheld, DJI. I've forgotten what they're called. Anyway, it's a little camera that shoots pretty nice still photos and video, to a drone, to my regular cameras, to 4x5, to 8x10. My parting gift from the Star-Telegram was a drone license. They wanted to have 2 photographers at every McClatchy paper that knew how to fly a drone. So my boss and I went to North Carolina, learned how to fly a drone, got a license, went through all the process. And then a few months later, they laid him off and gave everybody else a buyout offer, and I left the Star Telegram. At one point, we had 36 photographers, and it got down to 4. I mean, the problems in the newspaper business are well documented. And then at one point, they came in and wanted to get us down to 2, and they offered everybody a buyout. 3 of us took it. One person stayed. His life was immediately miserable, made more miserable by the fact that he was covering the Cowboys a couple of weeks later and got hit at full speed with a free safety coming off the field, who laid him out and gave him a concussion that lasted several months. So, yeah. Hey, Walter.
So when you were in Chiapas, were you covering the Zapatistas?
No, I wasn't. I was down there. Actually, that was a personal trip. Carol and I went down there on a medical missionary trip to Chiapas, and it was really like going 400 years back in time.
Been there. It's were you in San Cristobal.
Yes. Yeah, it's gorgeous. It was kind of a monsoon season. We hiked through a monsoon. It was like romancing the stone level stuff.
Roger,
Yes.
one of our Zoom attendees asks if you have to get releases from the people that you photograph.
In some circumstances, you do, but not for newspaper work. In newspapers, one, there is no expectation of privacy out in public. So if I'm photographing a news event at, a stadium or downtown or anywhere, you have no expectation of privacy, just because you're out in public. Now, there are other circumstances that might be more delicate. Newspapers, we never got press releases or model releases. When I shoot for TCU Magazine, I have to get a model release for every person I photograph. So it really depends on what the purpose is and how tight the lawyers are. Billy Joe?
Did your assignment editors have specific things they wanted you to photograph or that you were better at than others when you were at full staff?
Yes.
And what was your specialties?
Architecture, as you saw from the buildings, anything related to flying, because I had a pilot's license. And people, just delicate situations.
You're supposed to be able to take any pictures, anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, but there are people who specialize, and there are people who are better at sports than I was. But towards the later years, when I shot more and more sports, I got better at sports.
We have another question from the Zoom audience. Somebody wanted more clarification on the open heart surgery.
Which part of it?
The pitcher of water, what was more efficient by using the pitcher? What were they doing?
I think it was faster. I think you could just instantly cool down the heart by doing that, and then they could massage the heart, and that lowered its activity. The person was already on a heart-lung machine, so they were just trying to keep it cool and keep it alive.
And do we have any other questions in here?
Maybe just a little bit about your mindset when you're taking photographs of people and what it takes to keep them being natural and normal in position.
Yeah, that's really hard with, the question is my mindset when I'm photographing people and what it takes to keep them natural. For the most part, you have to wait them out. Patience is your friend. Everybody, when you go into a situation, says, well, what do you want me to do? I want you to do what you were doing before I got here. And so it's a matter of actually letting them get bored with me. So I just keep working and moving and taking pictures, and pretty soon I'm old news, and then something real will happen.
the corollary to that is people would say, how do you get up front? How do you get access? And we were always told your camera is your access.
Well, that's true, yeah. How do you get up front? How do you get access? There are two things, the camera, and it's less so now, but the word Star Telegram were just an open sesame. If you say you're with the Star Telegram, people would say, come in. You know, they wanted to be in the newspaper. Yes?
And more, any photographs of Willie Nelson over the years?
I did photograph Willie a couple of times, but I don't have access to everything I shot. I mean, some of it's at the paper and at UTA. And I don't recall photographing anything of Willie that I just loved, unfortunately. Jim?
I have a memory of opening the Star Telegram, and the cover page top photo was of the stock show parade.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at that picture and I thought, that's Rodger Mallison.
Well, thank you. I guess it was a good picture.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Okay, good.
It had images reflect. It was a rainy day, and the stock show parades are horrible weather. And
Generally.
it was just images caught in the reflection of the puddles of water and the excitement of the kids and the wagons going by. It was just a phenomenal composition.
Thanks. That's what you look for. Sometimes you get it.
How long did you work with Tim Madigan?
A long time. You know, I can't tell you how many years actually. All the time that he was at the Star Telegram, because I came there before he did. And then
I like Tim a lot.
Tim's a great guy and a great writer.
He really is. It's terrific.
Yeah.
We have another question from Zoom. Ron Abram wanted to know, how did you pose Opal Lee for that photo? And second part, does she have a copy of that?
I don't know if Opal has a copy of that photo. I didn't pose her. I just walked around with her on a very cold Saturday morning before the inauguration and tried to keep up with her, which wasn't actually all that easy because she's pretty spry.
And we have another question from Zoom. Have there ever been any photos you've taken that you didn't realize until later would be really valuable in terms of capturing history? Do you go in with that mindset at all?
I go in with the mindset of trying to record what I can see, and I'm always aware that this is part of the historical record. And yes, I have been surprised. I'm trying to think of an instance, but I have been surprised when something would be looked at back on and be considered historical, surprising, and I thought it was absolutely nothing at the time. I wish I could think of an example off the top of my head, but yes, you don't know what's going to be historically important when you do the first draft of something.
I have a sort of a big picture question about your work. I understand that probably some of what you did was copyrighted by the Star Telegram because you were doing work for them and probably other entities. But the work that falls under your private collection, have you thought about where that work might be stored so that researchers could have access to it in the future, because it is a treasure trove?
Well, thank you. I have not thought about that too much. Yeah, the Star Telegram does own most of what I did. The things I've done personally, well, there have been a couple of projects that are historical. I did a book called Fort Worth Then and Now, where I took old pictures of Fort Worth and reshot them in the 2000 modern day. A lot of those things I could go back and reshoot and they'd be all different. So, I mean, that would actually be a fun project to do. But no, you're right, I need to give that more consideration.
It's a question that many of our speakers are considering, to
Yeah.
tell you the truth. So that's why I wondered if you had considered it too.
Only a little bit.
Well, I think there must be a collection, an institution out there that would be interested.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Well, again, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.